So give us an idea of what your monthly or weekly budget looks like.
So monthly budget for the two of us.
Is there anything that is more expensive than back home or that was surprising in its expense down there?
I can't think of anything.
Before that, how was it arriving, trying to make friends? Did you learn Italian before you went? Give us a rundown. All right. And if any American called you up today and asked, I'm thinking about moving to Calabria, what would your answer for them be? Hello, this is Kalashian, and today I'm sitting down with Su Guillory, an expat in Calabria in the south of Italy. So, Su, tell us just a little bit about your background and how you came to wind up in Italy.
So I have a son who's now 21, but when he was in high school, I started thinking, what do I want to do with my life once, I have that empty nest? And the answer was Italy. So I moved here in 2022 by myself with 2 cats and 11 boxes. And yeah, so I've been here in the South by the Ionian Sea. I've since fallen in love. I've gotten married, and we now live in his mountain town, which overlooks the Ionian Sea and is 10 minutes from it, and a little cooler, which I'm appreciating right now because it's so hot.
Yeah, I bet. So you found your way to Calabria. I know it was a bit of a roundabout story, but how did you end up choosing this part of Italy over some of the more well-known, the Sicily or the Tuscany or Puglia?
Honestly, it didn't interest me to be where all the foreigners, the Americans were. Also in Italy, there's a tax incentive for all of the regions in the south of Italy. So foreign taxes are pretty high here in Italy. So the foreigners pay, I think it's a 7 or 9% flat tax for a period of years. So that was appealing. So it was my initial kind of focus on the south, as well as the weather is warmer. There's not a lot of snow down here. I tried a few cities, including Reggio Calabria, Scilla, and Tropea, but nothing felt good. And someone had advised me to check out Sovrato. I did. It's a town of 9,000 people, and it felt really good. So I've been there or in the region of Sovrato since. And yeah, it was the right decision.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about the settling in period. When you first arrived, what was the most surprising thing, the changes between your old life and your new life? Was it what you expected or?
No, but honestly, it's been more the last year that the biggest changes have come, because now that I'm in this mountain town where I think there's 900 people, I say on a good day with all the cats included. I lived in San Diego for 12 years. So just to be in a town where everything is so slow, everyone has a piece of land, whether they consider themselves farmers or no. So they're raising their food, sharing with others, raising their own meat. So I had an interesting conversation with my father-in-law today about, I said in America, I didn't eat a lot of meat because, all the cows and chickens were all squished and all together. Whereas here, either we're raising it or the family butcher is buying it from someone, they have space to roam. Mm-hmm. And my husband's uncle was saying, he was a retired butcher. He's saying, yeah, Italy has really strict rules about how they raise animals. And I like that. And there's something so different. I said, in America, my relationship with meat, with the animals, was the meat in the grocery store. Mm-hmm. And so I think the biggest change for me is just like how much more in touch with the land I am and appreciating where my food comes from.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, I love being able to eat so seasonally here in Europe. What you get in the market changes week to week, and you can't expect to have strawberries year round or whatever it is.
Exactly. Yeah.
So walk me through a typical day for you. Let's say, take a random day of the week. What would your, going about your day look like?
Well, I can take today. And it's funny because at the beginning, it felt very different. When you first become an expat, you're still kind of in that honeymoon phase where now it's just life. Yeah. So I got up, I did yoga before it got too hot. My mother-in-law had gone to the market. So I went to her house and I do my shopping there. I took her the tomatoes she had gotten, had coffee with my in-laws. And I stopped by my husband's aunt's house to order her some shoes from Amazon, because apparently that's my job in this family now. Yeah. So I'm a freelance writer and expat coach. So my work is very flexible. So, after this afternoon, I'm going to sit down and write an article. This time of year, I might go down to the sea. So I find life has slowed down a lot in a really beautiful way that still takes some adjusting for me as an American that, felt like productivity was my value, my worth. This afternoon, we're going to go have an aperitivo, a happy hour with some friends in another town. And yeah, that's a typical day.
That sounds very idyllic. Love it. So you mentioned your relationship with food, and, obviously a part of day-to-day life is shopping. Do you have grocery stores, that resemble back home, or, how do you do your shopping right now?
I mean, back home, you had a giant store with choice, so much choice. Which now, at the beginning, it made me really frustrated. Like, I have two choices for cereal, for example. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but it was frustrating. Whereas now I look at America in the opposite way. Like, why do we need so much choice? Why do we need 20 kinds of cereal? So there's one grocery store that's pretty big, kind of on par with, I grew up with Kroger and Vons. The other ones are a lot smaller. So just like in America, for if I want produce, I go to this store because it's better. If I want something on sale, I go to another one. So I kind of rotate between 2 to 4, depending on the seasonality. But then I go to the butcher when I have kind of the time and it's convenient. There's a store that's just frozen food.
Mhm.
So I will get frozen fish or maybe some vegetables, sweets if I'm, if I'm in the mood. So yeah, so I do a little bit more. And because I'm in the mountain, I don't really shop at the two tiny stores here. So if I go down the mountain, it's kind of like, let me do all my shopping and all my errands together.
Gotcha. So yeah, what about eating out in your little town? Is I imagine there's not a huge restaurant scene. Are there some cafes, or do you have to kind of hit all the villages to get a night out?
Both. So surprisingly, we have 3 really wonderful restaurants. So those we're very lucky. One, they do other things, but we go for pizza. It's really good. Another one, they do like happy hour, like an abundant, meats and fried foods and cheeses. The other one's kind of a mix. But yeah, we go down the hill and we've got, a lot of choices. And right now the beach clubs are open. So you can, eat on the beach. Pizza's always abundant. I eat out a lot less. I think just culturally, it's not it's something that they do here as much as I did in America. And, we cook. And the choices when you go out to eat are pizza, pasta, or sushi or pizza. So, I miss having, Indian or Thai or Japanese. So, there's not as much variety here.
Okay. All right. So the cost of living question, this is always one of the biggest things people are interested in when they hear about people living overseas. You mentioned the high taxes, and I think so many people are afraid of Europe because of the tax picture and how onerous it can be. So give us an idea of what your monthly or weekly budget looks like.
Okay, well, I can go through. I would say, okay, so monthly budget for the two of us. Now, keep in mind, we don't have a mortgage, so that helps. And we can go back and talk about cost of housing. For the two of us, and again, getting a lot of vegetables from my in-laws, we live very comfortably on €1,000 a month, which is crazy. I know. I was so happy with this. So groceries, I might spend 30 to 50 a week, depending. Electricity bill will change because it's, we're using the air conditioning more, but I would say 100 to 150 a month. And then we also have gas, which is for the stove and hot water maybe, and that's 30 a month. Cell phones are ridiculously, I pay 5 a month.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I paid $80 a month in America, and I don't understand. It's the same technology. Why?
Exactly.
5 a month for that. Wi-Fi is 30. And what am I missing? The car insurance. I pay $200 a year. I've got a 500 Fiat, little tiny car. So housing. So when we lived in Sorato, we had an apartment 2 steps from the sea, 2-bedroom, pretty nicely sized. We paid €450 a month. However, because this is a beach town, what they do is they jack up the price for July and August. So we had to pay, and this was a discount, $3,500 for those 2 months combined.
Wow.
Some landlords don't care. They will do, the same price all year long. Some because they can just rent out the house for 2 months of the year and make more than they could otherwise. In terms of buying, so I'm in a town called Davoli in the mountains, but then Davoli Marina near the sea, our aunt bought an apartment, 1-bedroom, small apartment, but €40,000. I have clients in Sorato that are put in an offer for 200,000 near the sea for 2 bedrooms, I think. So it's so much more affordable than what we're used to anywhere in the US. So yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So what about healthcare? This is, a huge expense for most Americans. And I know that living in Europe, things tend to be cheaper. Do you have local insurance? Do you have international insurance?
I don't have insurance. I have the national system, so I don't pay for that. I might have to pay for blood work. I had a full panel that probably would have cost at least 300 in the US. It costs 40 euros. Doctor's visits are free. The problem with Calabria is that it's sometimes hard to get appointments. So for instance, if I try to get an appointment for, what's a good example? An MRI. Okay. With the health system, it may take a year. And I'm like, if you have a health problem, you probably need this right now.
Right.
So I've done a balance. So for that, I had one last year and I paid 300 euros. And I think comparably in the US, even with insurance, it may cost over 1,000.
Yes,
So
definitely.
I do a balance where I'll pay out of pocket if I need to. Like my gynecologist, just because I love her and I don't want to. The hospital will give you a different doctor every time, so I pay 125 for like a full visit. So even with paying out of pocket, I'm still paying less than the 380 a month I was paying for self-employed insurance in the US.
Wow. Great. And all right, so you mentioned transportation, and gas is much more expensive in Europe. I think we just need to make sure that Americans are adjusting their expectations here, because America does benefit from having some pretty cheap gasoline. So how much do you think you spend on fuel for a month or a week?
Well, we don't drive a lot. So my husband drives to work, but in the summer he's driving his Vespa. So gas right now is 187 a liter.
Right.
So I think that actually kind of evens out to what I paid in California. So you're looking at like a little over 5 or 6 a gallon. A month, yeah, I might say 30 to 50, just depending on how much we're driving. But again, and it's where you are. So where we are, it would be very difficult to not have a car.
Right.
But like in a town, I walk around in the town. But then if I go down to Sovrato or I need to run errands, or that, using the car for that. So yeah, and other parts in Italy, obviously, you don't even need a car. Like if you're in Rome or a big city with better transportation options, it's, you don't need it.
Yeah, fantastic. So other than the gas, is there anything that is more expensive than back home, or that was surprising in its expense down there?
I can't think of anything. Clothes seem cheaper. Food is cheaper.
Electronics?
No, I feel like they might even be a little cheaper.
Wow. Great.
Yeah. Yeah. So, like TVs and things, I felt like it was a little bit lower than what I would have paid in the US.
Okay, awesome. All right, so you own your home. I guess it's a family home, so your husband and your family own it. So let's talk about what kind of home it is. It's a standalone, I think, and it's, are you in a town, or are you just totally isolated?
No, so it's not standalone. It's part of an old palazzo. It's 200 years old. It was carved out of stone. So it's good against the heat. So we're in like this town, we're on the edge of like the historic district. So this area, it's all they were built, at least 100, if not 200 years ago. So we've got old, beautiful, but uneven and scary in the winter steps to go to our house. This is where his grandfather bought this house after he had worked in America for a while. And his mother was raised here, and it's 2 levels, but upstairs wasn't developed until like the 60s. So she and there's probably 5 at a time, siblings shared a room. And then the room I'm in now, my office, was the kitchen, and upstairs was like an oven. And now, so they've expanded. So upstairs is the kitchen and the living room and another bathroom. So it's a very funky, like my American aesthetics. It took me a while to get used to it because it's not, the shape of a house that you would expect. Like we have a carpenter and he'll do something and he's like, well, that's uneven. Like, the whole house is uneven.
All uneven.
Right. So you have to really customize things to get them to fit into corners, if they even do.
Yeah. And that's true, I think, for most of Europe. All the houses are so old. And I mean, I live in a fairly new building. It was built in the 70s, and still everything is bizarrely done. There's just these little weird nooks and crannies that make no sense. Okay, let's talk a little bit about community and integration. So obviously you've done a great job integrating. You married an Italian man, and now you've been totally adopted by his family. But, before that, how was it arriving, trying to make friends? Did you learn Italian before you went? Give us a rundown.
So I had been studying Italian for 10 years before, just because I have a degree in French and I just was interested in learning another language. So that helped, but it really was being here that helped accelerate the understanding. I met a few expats when I came, and they were indispensable in helping me just navigate the bureaucracy. The town I was in was like a bedroom community of Sovrato, which I've mentioned. I didn't feel like a part of the community. Like I never found it. Mm-hmm. And I think now it's because I didn't have, like to have one friend in a community can open up the doors in so many ways. being here, it's because I'm married and they know him. And so now they know me and they love me. So it's really about like being outgoing and talking to people and just finding your way, because you can very easily isolate yourself, if
Mhm.
you aren't really trying. And also, I will say some communities are probably more open and inviting than others.
Mhm.
So I lucked out into, coming into this town in the right time, 3 years into my journey, where I was more comfortable with the language and people had gotten to know me. And so, yeah, now it's a completely different experience.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean there's a bit of a learning curve when it comes to
Mhm.
fitting in, and it does take. It sounds kind of crazy to say it takes years, but it can take years. And then but then a few years in, you realize what a rich life you have built. And yes, it takes time.
Yeah,
I mean, you have to think back home. You had your whole life, to
yeah,
meet people, and you
yeah.
were in a community, since you were a kid, possibly. So think
Mhm.
about how you have to build all that up over time. And so what about today? So it sounds like you have a pretty fully Italianized life. Are you still
Mhm.
friends with any expats, or, part of any foreigner groups or anything like that?
I have a few friends that are expats. One, she found me through my website and I kind of directed her to Somorato. So she's there. Another couple, they're my clients, but now and then, we get together socially. There's not a huge expat community here and it's kind of dispersed because there's so many tiny towns. I honestly don't miss it. Like
Mhm.
I didn't come here to hang out with Americans.
Right.
But although I do see when I'm with them, I speak so much faster. I can make all the inside jokes that you only get if you grew up in America. So it's kind of a nice vacation from the Italians sometimes, just to be with people who understand my culture.
Yeah, I totally get that. And do you ever, have any homesickness? Have you ever had those thoughts of, you know, thinking you want to move back or move on
Oh,
somewhere else? No.
no, no. I mean, I miss more like my family and friends, occasionally food, but it's, I ask myself, if I were to move in the US, where would I want to live? Because I don't feel like attached to anywhere that I've been, and I don't have an answer. Yeah. And I feel like I can see long term here. And, I see kids that are becoming teenagers. And I'm like, I'm going to know them when they're married and have kids. Like I've never had that. I've never lived anywhere for more than say 12 years. So it's kind of a beautiful thing to put down roots.
Yeah. Oh, that's lovely. All right. So we've talked about some of the frustrations. They've come up organically, as they always do. Is there any one thing that you would say is the hardest, maybe the hardest thing to adapt to, the biggest culture shock, or just something that drives you crazy?
I'll say it's the bureaucracy. Like we have bureaucracy, or just even how things happen. Let's say we want to get our house painted. Okay. And so it's actually my husband's cousin who has a construction company. And so, he said, hey, can you come give us a quote? Yes, yes, yes. This won't happen for another month. I know. This is why I started the process early. So, in America, they want the money, so they come the next day. So for me, it's still hard for me to wait and just say, this is how things happen. They haven't forgotten me, I think. But it's just still this sense of entitlement, but like instant, we think we should get instant gratification. Right. And
Right.
so, or, Amazon says it'll deliver in 2 days and it takes six, it just depends. So I'm learning to just accept that things are never going to happen on my timeline, but you have your whole life in your home country, having gotten used to the way things were, and you come to another country and it feels like they do it wrong, but it's just how they do things. And I have to accept that,
Yeah, exactly. And I'm curious, this is a little bit off topic, but for me, one of my current frustrations is living through this heat wave and not having air conditioning, which up here in Northern Europe is pretty rare. How is that
Mm.
down there? I mean, you're in an old home, but you have air conditioning. I'm assuming a little wall unit.
Yes, it's blasting right now. Most people have it, not everyone uses it. My in-laws have a really big shady tree, so they don't ever turn theirs on. Actually, do they have it? I don't know that they have it. Interesting. But obviously global warming, it's so much hotter than it was 20 years ago. But what's interesting and horrible is that, in America, I say we get out of our air conditioned house, we get in our air conditioned car, we go in our air conditioned store. And here, if you're walking, which often you are, to a store or something, you're sweating.
You just sweat.
Um, and Italians have a really interesting, also horrible view of air conditioning. Like they think it's going to hurt them. And so the family just bought a new car. I'm like, okay, cool. In the summer, when we come back from the beach, we can turn it on, right? And my mother-in-law's like, oh, no, no, I don't like air conditioning. I'm like, So they feel like if it hits your neck, it's going to make you sick.
Right.
And I have different beliefs
Right.
based in science. And like me and my husband, he doesn't like to have it on. I could have it on all night and be happy. He doesn't. So it's causing a little friction in terms
Oh,
of like,
funny.
I'm going to die and kill him if I don't have some cool nights. But we figure it out. By the end of the summer, we've compromised, but we're at the beginning.
And so I'm curious, I mean, you are in southern Italy. I mean, it's not this hot all the time, but how cold does it get down there?
It's a mild winter. So, and it rained a lot this winter, but I would say like 40s. I don't think we ever really dipped down to freezing. I'm speaking Fahrenheit. Yeah, but it tends to stay 40s and 50s. A lot of rain. It higher up in the mountains, it snowed a couple of times, but where I am, and again, it used to snow here, and now no.
Yeah. Yeah. Ugh, the earlier these temperatures come, the worse it gets every year.
Mm.
Okay. Well, we talked about the biggest frustration. What would you say your biggest love of life, the biggest benefit that you've found in your new life?
Mm. I've really enjoyed getting to know their traditions. And again, I'm in a tiny town. Milan's going to be different, but we make sausage, we make wine, we pick the olives. All these traditions that to them are just how they've always done things. And I come in like, just teach me. I want to know how to make bread in the wood fire oven. So, and they see me. They're really curious because a lot of people, younger people, are not interested in carrying on these traditions. Whereas here's this American who's like, let's do them. You know. Yeah.
That's
So for instance, yesterday was San Giovanni, Saint John's Day.
Mhm.
And they have a tradition where you gather flowers the night before and you put them in a bowl of water and you leave them out for the dew of this day to bless them. And then you wash your face with it. So like I do that. I didn't have anyone
Wow.
do it. My husband was with me, but I'm just like, it's such a beautiful tradition. Yeah, I love getting to know these traditions and holding them.
That's lovely. Okay, so you did mention actually the fact of, Americans are kind of just living climate controlled, where they're living indoors in America for,
Mm.
much of the day. And here in Europe, we do live life outdoors quite a bit more. And I know you've found some really, really unique benefits to, your life outside. So tell us a little bit about your explorations with nature.
Ah, so yeah, so because I'm in the mountains, I can go in any direction and take a nice hike. I say hike, I mean it's on the street, but up into the mountains. I've started studying herbalism. San Diego didn't have a lot of trees or like lush plants, and so here they're everywhere. So I'm learning the plants and how to use them medicinally. Or I actually started a skincare brand, so I'm making products with calendula and lavender and just the things that I'm getting to know or harvesting. And yeah, it's such a juxtaposition from my life of sitting in front of a computer all day long, which I've done for decades. So I'm really enjoying that, as well as getting to know, like you're saying, the seasonality. So the flower, every time I take a walk, even if it's a week later, the flowers have changed.
That's
And
cool.
there's fruit. Yeah, yeah. So and our family has fruit trees. So right now the pears are growing, and my father-in-law's like, oh, they're really good. So we'll go pick them in a few weeks.
Oh, lovely. All right. So let's talk about who would like living here and who would not like living here. So, in
Okay.
terms of demographics, retirees, families, remote workers, young professionals, among all of these categories, who do you think is right for this part of the world?
I don't know if I would break it down into categories as much as say, Calabria is not an easy place in comparison to, say, Tuscany or somewhere that's more accessible with transportation, more inviting to not that it's not inviting, doesn't have a large expat community. So someone who doesn't need to be surrounded by expat, working remotely, yes, because there's not work for Italians here. So anyone coming here who thinks they're going to find a job locally is going to be disappointed. Also, because the cost of living is so low, salaries are low. So it's often a shock for Americans to see, what the average salary is. And, a lot of us, including me, still have American expenses, so it doesn't balance out. Retirees, yes, definitely. I would say people who have or are interested in really studying Italian, because there are not a lot of people who speak English. So I find it respectful to learn the language, but also it's so much easier to communicate in everyday things, but also to build a community.
Right.
Because I have little old women who only speak dialect, and now that I'm understanding, like I'm building a relationship with them I couldn't have if I only spoke English.
Hmm.
Families, I can't speak on that just because of like the school systems. I don't have a lot of experience knowing what that's like. I think they would be maybe lower than what we're accustomed to in America in terms of quality. And I can't speak for all. I mean, I haven't raised a child here, so I can't
Right.
speak. But I think what would I do? We have a private school run by nuns, so a lot of people send their kids there. So that there's private schools that may be a better option. But I would say digital nomads, retirees. I mean, I know a lot of single women who have moved to Calabria. So, but I think it's a certain person, that can be alone and have to kind of forge your own way. I always warn couples, like you're in danger of isolating yourselves because you have each other. So you have to
Exactly.
make sure that you're turning out and making friends in the community. Otherwise, you're at home speaking English all day. And why are you in Italy if, you could do that at home?
Yeah, that's a really good point. All right, lightning round. This is the fun one. Favorite town in Calabria? Is it your own or do you like another one?
It's my own. It's my own. Yeah. There are festivals all over in the summer, but I only come to ours because I need to rest in between. They're so fun. So yeah, mine. It's got a lot of charm.
Nice. Favorite local food?
Whatever my mother-in-law's making. No, the chili pepper is a big ingredient here, and I love spicy food. So there are a lot of dishes that incorporate the pepperoncino, it's called.
Awesome. Best beach in the area?
I don't have a favorite, just Davoli Marina. I mean, the beach can change from here to there. So generally, I'd say Davoli Marina because there's a lot more parking than Sobrato is a bigger town. There's zero parking. So I like a little bit quieter, calmer, more relaxed vibe.
Nice. What's the most overrated thing about Italy? Or, something that Americans come expecting and are disappointed?
I think they think it's going to be like Instagram,
Mm,
and if you're on vacation, it can be, but
right.
it's life here is very different. Yeah.
Most underrated thing about Italy or Calabria?
I say Calabria as a destination. We have beautiful beaches, and compared to, say, Amalfi Coast, the people who come here are from the north of Italy, or they're German or Russian, and occasionally English, and occasionally American. But it's just not on people's radars, which I'm
Mhm.
kind of okay with, but also like they're missing out.
Yeah. All right. One thing that every prospective expat should know.
I would say something they should do is to come and visit before renting or buying a house online, or deciding. I thought I had found the right town for me online, but when I came, it didn't have what I needed. And that's something you cannot understand online. You really need to come, stay as long as you can, meet people, go to the same bar every day, tell the barista that you're interested in living here, and see if that opens some doors, just, introduction wise.
Great. All right. And if any American called you up today and asked, I'm thinking about moving to Calabria, what would your answer for them be?
What's the question? Should they? Should they move to Calabria?
Should I? Should I not?
I mean, yes, but again, with that caveat of like you have to understand that it's not Tuscany. It's a little more. You have to put in a little more work
Mhm.
to find your life here, but it can be just so rewarding.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And
Thank
I
you.
hope to speak with you again soon.
Thank you, Kat.